strangely delightful.
It's a pleasure to have you with us, Mrs. Thornton.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Discourse on any subject is one of my favorite pastimes, and I can't recall the last time I partook.
Mrs. Thornton, can you tell me about Arthur Bowen and the events which took place in 1835?
Oh, Arthur was a handsome young man, a wonderful boy, beautiful eyes. Arthur was born, I believe, in 1815, and so by 1835, he was a young man with all the problems of his age. He was also a slave, and that brought its own problems.
How did you feel about slavery?
I inherited Arthur and his mother. Like many of my friends, we didn't set out to buy slaves. I've never been fond of our peculiar institution, and many of us hoped that it would someday just fade away. Being a slave, of course, was the source of all Arthur's troubles. I would have freed him, if not for what my friends would have thought. There were many that believed the negative discourse that Mr. Calhoun had been preaching lately, but both Maria and I felt it was in Arthur's best interest to be taken care of by us anyway. The abolitionists and the anti-slavery literature that was going on round the city almost ruined him and ended his life. We were both terrified. We had no idea what he was doing. Maria had succeeded in getting him out the back door before I returned with some neighbors. We could still hear Arthur yelling and screaming something about wanting freedom. It was horrible. And then Arthur disappeared, and I was worried what the authorities might do to him if they found him. After they arrested Arthur, I felt terrible. I went to see F.S.Key. He'd been friends with my husband and had defended him in a court case. I appealed to him to let me sell Arthur off and get him out of town.
How did Mr. Key respond?
He was very uneasy, almost fearful. I had no idea why, but he said he couldn't be seen as being soft upon a rebellious slave, and he could show no countenance to this kind of behavior. I tried to appeal to him, but he said the case had to go to trial. At Arthur's trial, Mr. Key persevered and was called witnesses that made it sound like Arthur had raised the axe against me. Mr. Key was quite impassioned and possessed. Even after I told the story and was backed up by Maria, Mr. Key secured his conviction of Arthur after only one day of trial. There was only one penalty for attempted murder by a slave. They put Arthur in a death cell and set his hanging for the last day of February in 1836. That January, I awoke as if from a deep sleep. I knew I had to do everything I could to prevent Arthur from being hanged.
So what did you do?
I started by circulating a petition among my friends on F Street and among the finer houses of the city. I said the punishment would be worse than the crime, and that if Arthur were executed for this, it's much worse than what he was accused of.
It's pretty unusual for a lady of your standing to have taken such strong actions for a slave, isn't it?
It was just wrong, and I didn't want to see them get away with it. There was enough damage done over the whole thing.
And you went to Jackson as well?
Yes, I went to the White House to see President Jackson, and I begged him to use his power of pardon and let Arthur come home.
That woman was a hell of a lot more spunky than even my dear Rachel. I admired her.